see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody. It is Friday, June 16th, 2023. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. And each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can help support this show, become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head over to patreon.com/rcpress. You can also help out the show by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And if you're one of our awesome podcast listeners, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen on. Leave a comment. Let other folks know why you like the show. Little things like this help other people find the show. We can't let Paul Martino, Moms for Liberty, and their oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted PAC to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. Putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. Well, on this week's show, we got a bunch of stuff going on. A little discombobulated this morning, I must admit. In addition to kind of just messing up my plan for the morning, because I'm just whatever, clueless. Just kind of whatever. Then ran into a couple little tech issues, but I had forgotten that there was mentioned kind of, well, I'll get into it in a minute. But anyways, I'm here, so we got it. So, big week this week. Donald Trump was officially kind of brought up in court, and they had his hearing where he was pled not guilty to 37 charges, so we'll see what's going on with there. It was a kind of cool, kind of pretty landmark Supreme Court case that came through where the Indian Child Welfare Act was upheld by the Supreme Court in a 7-2 ruling, and this just came down yesterday. There was some fear that that the court was going to strip away this act. This act basically allows to make sure that Native American children you're keeping Native American children with their families, right, or their tribes in foster care and adoption cases if possible. It's a long, very brutal and sordid history there of Native children being taken away from their families and placed with white people. But anyways, so that's pretty good. Some more Supreme Court cases coming up. We also know that China just announced that fossil fuels now account for less than half of China's power capacity. Now, let's be clear, this doesn't mean that they are actually powering their country on less than half fossil fuels. It has to do with the overall capacity, but that's still a milestone. That's 2 years ahead of time what they were planning on. The pretty awesome Elizabeth Fiedler's awesome bill for keeping solar in schools is being held up by a Republican immigration amendment. Yes, indeed. By the one, the only, Martina White. And then this is kudos to Sean Kitchen for publishing this story out there in the Keystone newsroom. This is kind of a key thing. We've talked about the Solar in Schools program, the show, a bit. It's a freaking amazing program. This is exactly the kind of smart, targeted program that Elizabeth Fiedler is becoming to be known by, right? Really things that are going to help people, that are going to help schools, that are going to help the climate. But Martina White wants to make sure that we got to make it racist too. So that's causing a pause of that. Really interesting information or some research being published now about this AI feedback loop. Really fascinating that they're finding out that, basically what happens when AIs, because, AIs depend upon the information that's out there. Well, what happens when more and more of the information that's out there is actually being generated by AIs? It's kind of interesting, right? Adam Schiff gets censored, and there's some kind of $16 million they want him to pay or whatever. It's just whatever. News, what we've been following this week, of course. What we've been calling this, of course, is the Penridge school board meeting, which took place on Monday, which follows up a disastrous previous meeting. And front and center was the Vermillion contract, right? That is the contract to rewrite the social studies curriculum from a brand new consultant that's minted from a Christian nationalist college. And they want to bring on the Christian nationalist version of social studies to Penridge School District. Penridge has the honor, if you will, of being the only client of Vermillion. And the young environmentalist case that out in Montana has kind of officially started trial, and this is going to be on. Fantastic, quite interesting. And also great article reporting by Jenny Stevens again in the Bucks County Beacon that goes to some right-to-know documents that came out that shows that the Penridge superintendent tried to push back against some of this Vermillion stuff. Push back, maybe that's a little bit too strong of a word. We could say at least that raised some objections and then was heartily kind of dismissed and belittled by Megan Bannis Clemmings, as you would expect. A bunch of other stuff too as well. We'll get into some other things, I'm sure, as we go. But as you can tell already, I'm just a little off today, So for more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, or subscribe to his podcast wherever you get your podcast. Down over to ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all of his platforms. And congratulations goes out to Rick Smith for getting in the top 100. What do they call it? The heavy 100 or something like this. The top 100 from Talkers Magazine. Huge deal, right? Rick has been around. He has been doing, the good work of labor radio now for years, and getting this kind of recognition in kind of the national sphere is pretty awesome, right? So congratulations to Rick, and we're also sorry, Rick, that had to come at a time when you got COVID for the first time. So hopefully that stops kicking your butt and you can start to feel better again. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. The amazing PA women stirring their political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house, and they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. And if you haven't heard, The Signal is a new podcast from the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by the Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Michaleko, and produced by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signal will shine a light on the right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. And Cyril invites guests who can provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions that we can steer the community towards calmer, saner, progressive routes. Check out the buckscountybeacon.podbean.com for all the episodes, or get it wherever you get your podcasts. And for all you gamers out there, the Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show. They've got everything for retro N64s, latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. Kids get discounts when they get A's in the report cards, so bring those end-of-the-year report cards into the Game Inn. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game Inn. That's with 2 N's. You got a question about a game, looking for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongOfDayMan. That's with 2 N's, at SongOfDayMan on Twitter. And if we want progressive future, we need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches, homegrown progressive media today. Become a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Simply go to patreon.com/rcpress. Look, we're here for the fight, but we need you. Become a patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement and the movement in the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress today. Well, there we have it. As you can probably already hear, that my brain is a little fuzzy this morning, and that's just going to be the way it is. That's why I got my extra little mug of coffee here, and we're good to go. Well, I hope everything's going well on your end of things. I hope that I'm quite pleased that we're going to get another day of rain. I don't know about all of you, but we had rain for the first time in a long time earlier in the week, and today we're forecast to get another day of rain, or at least some rain, which I'm quite thrilled about. Something happens, it's like, it's not just the ground and stuff, everything gets dry around night, but something like, I don't know, feels like, built into my, DNA or whatever, that just kind of starts to feel weird when it doesn't rain for a long time. So it is what it is. So big news this week was that Donald Trump appeared in court. And, I get it. It's a big deal. But whether or not this is going to be able to go to trial before the election in 2024 is a big question mark. There's a lot of things. I was listening to some podcasts and reading some articles, just kind of like, not like articles about the case per se, but just talking about, you have a case of this magnitude. What's the process? What's the quote unquote normal process, but then what's this, kind of projections of what we're going to face here in this kind of trial, right? And that's even before you start talking about this, the trial being with Donald Trump, who's going to do everything that's, he can do to not actually face any jail time. So, but with all, for example, top secret or confidential clearances that are going to have to be done through the FBI, appeals about whether or not the documents that Trump stole from the U.S. government was whether they need to be part of the public record, right? Which means they would have to be declassified, which means those documents would need to go through. I mean, things like that. There's a lot of things that have to happen for the trial to actually start. I mean, we already know that, Trump is, making history again by being the first U.S. president ever appearing in court to be formally charged with criminal conduct while in office, or out of, I guess it's both in office and out of office. It's, pretty remarkable. And there's more trials coming up. So that is, that's pretty much what Donald Trump's campaign is going to be about, right? It's going to be about grievance. It's going to be about the deep state. It's going to be about, the witch hunt, all that kind of stuff. So at least everybody knows what's going on now. The big challenge for anybody running against Trump is going to be how to actually get any media coverage. Right. I mean, Trump is going to dominate the media coverage because of these trials, and his presidential campaign for that matter. So we can expect lots of craziness coming out of that campaign, and it is going to be what it is, and it's going to be a long slug. That's for sure. Crazy. One thing I did not mention at the top of the show, I did want to touch upon this. Like, I'll be honest with you. So the way that the show is going to run today is that normally what I do, right, is I'll go through, and throughout the week I'll kind of tag particular articles, right, that I want to go through, and then spend some time, like, the evening before, and then the morning before the show, kind of organizing things out and so on. Just did not have time to do that part of it now, so I just got my list of tagged shows here, so I'm going to be jumping around a little bit today. But this is one thing that I just found was like pretty remarkable, and I came across this in the New Republic. Republicans, this is the headline for it: Republicans declare banning universal school meals as a 2024 priority. I mean, this is just unbelievable. So I'm going to read just this quick piece here. So states across the country are moving to provide universal free school lunch meals to all our children. Meanwhile, Republicans are trying to stop them from doing just that. The Republican Study Committee, of which 3/4 of the House Republicans are members, on Wednesday released its desired 2024 budget, in which the party boldly declares its priority to eliminate the Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP, from the school lunch program. Why? Because, quote, the CEP allows certain schools to provide free school lunches regardless of the individual eligibility of each student. The horror, they say. Of note is that the CEP is not even something every school participates in. It is a meal service program reserved for qualifying schools in districts in low-income areas. The program enables schools that predominantly serve children from low-income backgrounds to offer all students free breakfast and lunch instead of means testing them and having to manage collecting applications on an individual basis. As with many universal-oriented programs, it is more practically efficient and, as a bonus, lifts all boats. This is what Republicans are looking to eliminate. It's the kind of provision that many would want every school to participate in. Why not guarantee all our children are well fed and they learn and think about our world and their place in it after all? 100%. We've had Nick on the show, Nick Marsuzel on the show before, talking about the attempts to get the free extended universal free lunch programs extended in parts of Bucks County, which is fantastic. I want to have him back on the show. He's he lets me know. He always keeps me up to date on what's happening. But this just is like, in my mind, it's common sense. And one of the dynamics that's amazing. There's that the only way of really explaining this move from that Republican Study Committee, right, and the Republican Party, right, and frankly, a good chunk of the the leadership of the olding and aging leadership of the Democratic Party. The only way to really explain moves like this is punishment and belittlement and cruelty. There's that book, right? The cruelty is the point. And what do I mean by that? It's like, well, the whole idea about means testing, right? I guess I remember this. I've told the story. It's probably been a long time since I've talked about this. I mean, not for any problematic reason, just because I just it hasn't come up in any way. But when I see things like this, it always reminds me. It's like I grew up, for a good chunk of my childhood. My mom, my sister, and I. It's after my parents got divorced. But they, we had food stamps and we had to kind of register for some of these programs and things like this. And what I always, and I can't give you a particular, say, moment or memory where I remember this happening, right? Like I remember my mom filling out paperwork or going, but I do remember having to go and go to these different offices while they questioned my mom. I do remember the whole process of having to display the food stamps, right, and publicly, and other people kind of looking back and to shame us. Like, how can't believe you're blah 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 having food stamps and blah blah blah, this kind of stuff. But I've always thought it just seems, and I have to say, is there was a time during my punk rock period of time when I was kind of much more committed or much more interested in kind of like anarchism and anarcho-syndicalism and things like this, is that that kind of anti-government punk rock stuff. I mean, and where it came from was this kind of thing, right? Was this kind of means testing where the government is basically being utilized, right, as a way to make things more difficult for poor folks, more difficult for people who are already hurting. Right. And I'm not just talking about the kind of police brutality that we see exercised on, Black and brown communities primarily. Right. I mean, that's like kind of overt state violence. Right. I mean, what I'm talking about is the more mundane, daily, brutal ways of doing this. Like I remember being a kid and just wondering, as kids do, not and generally wonder, there was some housing projects that were directly across the street from our middle school, right, and which is great location for them, right? I mean, the idea is that, you're close to schools, you're close to a grocery store, it's right down there. So it was a really good location for it. And I remember that, some kids I went to school with and things like this. And I just remember the number of them who live only with their mom, right? And their father, or either their mom or their dad were not married, or so, or their father wasn't there, whatever it might be. And it was only later, and I just didn't, I was like, oh God, that was really sad, right? And I always, the initial reading I had was just, oh, that's what happened, when you're poor, it caused a lot of problems, right? You cause a lot of problems, a lot of stress, and so that it's harder for families to stick together, or whatever's gonna be the case, right? But what blew my mind later on, like when I was in high school, when I started to kind of read more about it, study more about how this stuff worked, and realizing that there were like governmental barriers, right, that would basically punish, right, a family, right, if so for example, that you could not have, if a woman was receiving, say, food stamps for their kids or any kind of welfare, right, to help support them, they could not receive that money. They would become ineligible for them if a man was living with them and they were not married, even if that man was the father of the kid, right? So it basically said you have to be married, right? So one, there's already this kind of assumptions being made about what is kind of upstanding, what gives you qualifying to get the benefit of citizenship and what's not, right? But then it also creates a situation, like a disincentive, right, to keep families together. Is that, of course, this is something that, I'm not telling you anything earth-shattering now. I mean, now this is pretty well understood that this has been systemically one of the ways that has continued to cause problems, right, as structural racism, right, because once again, you say these primarily affected, or the higher percentage of families of color, right, Black and brown families, who were kind of affected by this, right? It was a legacy of structural racism and, in some cases, overt racism, right, built into policy, right? So that was going on here. But even at the kind of more general level, is that anyone who's ever been poor, right, and has had to kind of deal with government agencies just to kind of get some help, right? I mean, I remember my family too as well. My sister was mentally disabled, right, and so having to deal with getting her help and all this stuff. The amount of time that it takes just in terms of paperwork, and the amount of surveillance that you have to go through from, say, government agents, right, who are checking in on you, making sure that you are, like, not misusing your kind of funds and all this kind of stuff. It's just horrific, right? It creates such a deep sense of the government is not there for me. The government is part of the problem, right? And that bleeds into our politics, right? People always ask, well, why poor people vote against their interests, or how come more poor people don't vote? It's like, well, if your primary experience with the government, right, is for them surveilling you, for them making you feel horrific, asking about your sexual practices just to see if you qualify for some medical aid, I mean, things like this. I mean, it's just, if that's your primary experience, right, and then you have the layer of kind of structural violence, right, kind of through kind of the enforcement wings of the state, all that stuff creates an antagonism, right, so that you're already kind of creating a government that doesn't feel like it's part of yours. But on top of that, right, this is kind of like started realizing later on in my years, what's on top of that, what is, if you just think about the idea of means testing something, that to make sure that not only do you have to meet certain kind of whatever moral characteristics in some of these programs, but you have to have a certain kind of financial level, right? So that, and what that number is separates who qualifies and who doesn't, right? So that you always heard stories of somebody kind of actually gets a job, it bumps them up just beyond the qualified thing, and then they lose all their benefits, and now they're thrown back basically in poverty because we don't have so many universal programs to support families and support individuals in this country, right? Especially at the lower end of the spectrum, right? Even below middle, really. But if you think about the amount of money and resources that goes into surveilling those mean test programs, right? I mean, what Republicans do and what they're doing in this universal lunch program thing, what they do is they say, and again, big sections of kind of like, bred in the 90s Democrats are also into this means testing stuff, right? And it's all framed around this, this language of deserving, who deserves to get this, right? And these people really don't need it, so we're only going to give it to deserving people, right? And you dividing these barriers and stuff. But in order to once you draw a line between those who deserve it and those who do not, right? Those who qualify and those who do not, you have to have a way of policing that line, right? Which means basically creating another bureaucracy, like whether it's through kind of police or whether it's through police or whether it's through different agencies, or whether it's kind of through reporting requirements, or whether it's kind of requiring you to prove like every 3 months that you still qualify for the program, and then people have to go through that paperwork. So a bureaucracy gets created around means testing, right? Because we're more concerned apparently as a culture to talk about who's deserving, who's not deserving, right? And to create resentments between those rather than just kind of give these universal programs. And the hidden cost of that is that in order to have means testing, like even if your argument is because, look, we don't have the money and, we can only kind of do so much and you can't do it for everybody because we don't have any money, right? Because we're broke, which we all know is a big lie and there's big problems with that and there's reasons for that, blah, blah, blah. But that gets kind of tried out because you want to be fiscally responsible, right? And all they're talking about is the cost of the actual aid itself, but not the kind of entire apparatus in which it's functioning, right? So those things end up costing more in the long run. The school lunch program is a perfect example, right? Is that COVID gave us a window into, or the programs around COVID gave us a window into a different kind of possibility, a different way of looking at like how we treat people. And again, this was not the dominant way things happened, but there were these little glimpses. And one of them was free lunches, right? It's like, our school district did it here in Penridge, right? You got federal funds that came in, right? And then nobody needed to be asked. You didn't need to prove that you qualified or you were deserving of a free lunch, right? You weren't shamed for it because basically everybody can get it, right? And so the money came in to buy lunch for anybody who wanted it. And there were kids, there were a couple days, right? I make my kids lunch every day, right? That's kind of what I do. But there were a couple days where, like my daughter or my son just like, I think I'm just going to just get lunch at school today. Okay. Right. Or, like they forgot their lunch at home, but then there was always something there. Right. And it wasn't like, because everybody could do it, right? Suddenly you take away all the shame away, right? You take away all the kind of like the questions about deserving and undeserving, or kind of like, oh my God, they must be poor. Now you had everybody just there and you just basically can get a lunch because you're hungry, right? And because it's lunchtime and because that's what you do at school, right? And so because that happened, there's no more surveillance mechanism. Right? All the kind of the bureaucracy, all the filling out of forms and stamping forms and checking forms and reapplying and applying, all that kind of thing is just gone. And instead, you've got this pretty efficient program and was shown to be extraordinarily successful. Right? And so this is the reason why I believe that the Republican Party is deciding that this is going to be a priority in their election. Because, really, who would imagine? I guess nothing's like unimaginable these days. But I would never imagine that like school lunches, making sure kids are fed, was going to be a priority in the Republican Party's campaigns for 2024. But here we are, right? And it goes to so much we've talked about over the years on this program, right? The idea that, why universal programs are good, why universal healthcare is so good, right? It's like not only like, does it end up being more cost effective because you're not paying all these middle people, right? These middle managers, you're not have companies that are kind of are looking for ways that they can have like higher profits, right? That they can push down costs so their CEOs can make more money, right? Once you have a universal option, right? Once you have the kind of, not even universal, once you have universal health care, right? The profit incentive is gone, right? All these other kind of like, the advertising campaigns that are run by drug companies are gone, right? And whether or not, that whole moment of like, you going in to see the doctor and like, do you have health insurance? That's gone. The intense amount of paperwork that goes into just basically documenting that you actually had like you actually had a visit, so therefore you should be able to, like, the insurance should pay for you, right? Should pay for that, right? The increase in the increase in the time that it takes just to deal with these requirements to support non-universal healthcare. It's right across the board. Emily makes a great point. They want to protect kids from inclusive books, but not hunger. It's like, where's the sense in that? Exactly, Emily. Exactly. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. So, there we have it. I mean, we have this, I don't know. It's the kind of thing that just really stuck in my craw when I saw it. And I literally, I saw the headline and I thought it was going to be one of these, headlines that's meant to get you upset, and then you read into it and it's actually not quite what it is. It has to do with some other program, but they want to, nope, that's exactly what they're doing. They want to take away free lunch. It's freaking, it's crazy. It's crazy. So, there you have it. A couple other things I'll mention, and then I want to talk a little about the Vermilion and Penridge situation. I do think it was pretty interesting that, I know there's other thing I didn't mention at the top two as well. I mentioned about China basically reporting that they have capacity of renewable energy sources now are kind of in the majority of their capacity, their energy capacity. And again, I was reading a little bit more about specifically what this means. Again, this is reported by state media, so you've got to put that with a grain of salt. But the energy that you're currently consuming, right, is not the same as your overall capacity. Like, so in other words, so the way that they measure this is, as I was reading about this was, so if you're taking, like, you build a huge solar array, right? Your capacity is that solar array operating on a sunny day, like in the middle of the day, and it's kind of getting the most possible energy out of it. So that's your kind of your overall capacity. So just like a fossil fuel plant, right? Your overall capacity is you're burning as much as you possibly can to get the most energy out of that. So that's your kind of capacity. And so the capacity, right, with wind and solar and kind of alternative sources and nuclear, I guess they included in this, is just tipped in the majority in China. However, if you look at the amount of fuel they're burning, coal is still their primary fuel source. But it nonetheless shows that, like, dedicated efforts in order to kind of build out capacity and infrastructure can be done, right? I mean, in a country as big as China, if they can do it, so we could do it, right? If they can do it, we can do it in this country, right? If we had our priorities right. Now, having said that, the upcoming COP28, which is, the climate change summit at the UN's Climate Change Global Climate Summit, there's some emerging controversy once again around the role that energy companies are playing in the, I shouldn't say energy companies, I should say oil companies, petroleum companies, fossil fuel companies are playing here. So I'll just read a little bit. This is this article from the New York Times. So, an unavoidable tension surrounds this year's United Nations climate talks in November. They will take place in the oil-rich United Arab Emirates, and the most important role that the talks is held. I'm sorry, and the most important role at the talks is held by the man who heads the national oil company. The executive Sultan Jaber, and other representatives of the Emiratis have argued they have a, quote, game-changing plan to fight climate change by welcoming oil and gas companies from around the world to participate more fully in the talks. In other words, invite the producers of the fuels that cause the majority of the global warming as key players in developing a plan to slow warming. In an interview, Majid al-Sawaidi, an Emirati diplomat, who will also play a major role in the climate talks, known by the acronym COP28, said, quote, "We need to engage the people who have the technical know-how, the skills, and the technology, and by the way, the people who will provide jobs in a conversation about how they transform." To activists who have attended these conferences for years, that notion sounded far-fetched. Quote, "It's just like how tobacco lobbyists need to be kept out of conversations about cancer prevention," unquote, said Catherine Ebro, who heads the Destination Zero, a network of nonprofits working on climate issues. The conference will take place amid a backdrop of resurgent fossil fuel investment after a brief pandemic-era dip. Energy use derived from fossil fuels accounts for more than 2/3 of global emissions, right? So that's something that we're going to see kind of, I think, come to a head. And if you remember, you had some activists who did not attend this past climate summit, precisely because of the role that oil and gas already was playing, right? The lobbyists or the companies themselves were playing at the talks. It's going to be an important, like, because time is like, quickly running out. I purposely did not kind of put on a bunch of articles this week on some of the climate catastrophes, just because I wasn't going to be able to give them the space that they want. But, there's evidence around us every single day. So what are we going to talk about for the rest of the time? All right, like I said, we'll keep things a little bit tight today. And I know I'm jumping around, as I said, but I do want to talk about what happened at the Penridge School Board meeting this past week. So I thought it was pretty impressive to see, like, again, so many, say, parents and community members that are coming out at the board to hold that board accountable. Because what had happened last week, as we talked about on the show last Friday, is that, there was this scheduling and rescheduling of this meeting at which Jordan Adams, who's the head of Vermilion Education, Jordan Adams was supposed to come to or appear, I guess, at the Penridge School Board to explain what they would add to the curriculum, or what their role would be in the curriculum at the that they've just been hired on, right? Because there's been so much criticism of what's going on. What's interesting, the things that came up. So that meeting was on the 12th, right? Now that morning, right? Huge credits go to Jenny Stevens and the folks at the Bucks County Beacon for their work on this. So that morning, Jenny Stevens published this in the Bucks County Beacon. It's an article called "Right to Know Documents Highlight Penridge Superintendent's Pushback Against Vermilion Education." What did I do with that? I had a print out of this too as well, but of course I'm probably stuffed. Oh, here they are. Yeah, and so I'll read you a little bit of Jenny's piece and then talk a little bit about it. So an extensive right to know, the Penridge School District has revealed an April 25th email exchange between Superintendent Dr. David Bolton, and School Board Director Jordan Blomgren that sheds light on dissension between the administration and the Republican majority school board on curriculum matters. The document reveals Bolton to have asked a variety of questions about the controversial Vermilion contract one day prior to the April 26th board meeting. And the superintendent's inquiries and comments included the timing of the added Vermilion contract, a contract that only Blomgren had reviewed to the board meeting agenda, that she had added to the board meeting's agenda 24 hours prior to the meeting. Only some board members had opportunity to review the documents, and others, including school board administrators, teachers, and the public, had not. Right? Bolton also emphasized that the contract did not contain certain description of the scope of work being contracted and so on. Right? Megan Bannis Clemens also wrote that prior to consultant, we've heard a bunch of this stuff already, but I wanted to give you a sense of what has gone. So Dr. Bolton, right, this is from the right to know request. So Dr. Bolton writes to Jordan Blomgren, she says, I am confirming receipt of your text from last night, this is 4/24, to inform me that we'd be adding a contract for a curriculum consultant, Jordan Adams, I was told by others, to come in and help with the curriculum overlay and development. You intend to add this contract to the board meeting tomorrow for consideration and vote under Finance Committee. It will be, has been, sent to Mike Miller for his review. At this point, no one in the district has seen the contract to review the scope of services and cost. I realize that you have spoken with several board members and that the board president ultimately establishes the agenda, quote, with superintendent input. Since we are outside of our normal process, I wanted to express some concerns on this matter. So he's already recognizing that you're violating the process that we're supposed to go through before these members come up. But number one, the timing. To suggest a new contract less than 48 hours before the meeting is not best practice. We strive to provide time and for both board and public review of items being considered. My understanding is that no one, except you, has seen this contract yet. The perception will be that this item is being rushed through. 2, the cost. No one was able to state the expected cost of the service at this point. These funds are obviously not captured in the 22-23 budget. 3, scope of the work. In your, parentheses, Jordan and Megan's, conversation with Tony and Kathy, it was indicated that this was to provide support for our process and to take some of the time and effort away from Kathy, Tony, and our staff. It was also indicated that it was not to undo anything that we all have already accomplished, but may include Mr. Adams writing some curriculum lessons or units. Then he's got a series A, B, and C. A, both Kathy and Tony do not believe that this resource is needed and that in contrast it may hurt the process. B, we are on track to present the 9th grade social studies course and at least one unit, perhaps 2 or 3 of each grade, of the elementary studies curriculum in June as asked. Those documents are the finish line and our staff has worked hard on these. So in other words, they're basically done doing the curriculum revisions of the social studies that have already been asked, and now they're saying they want to throw it all out. Since it's indicated that the consultant will not undo this work, we are not sure what the purpose he serves. C, I could not find a website to indicate the typical services that Mr. Adams, through Vermillion Education Consulting, offers. Number 4, the process. I'm concerned with that one board member negotiated a contract with curriculum consultant without conversation with anyone responsible for the development of curriculum. I do not believe that this is the board's responsibility and should have been trusted to Tony, Kathy, and or me if you felt this service would be helpful. You both, Jordan and Megan, have been fully involved in the curriculum process and have provided many ideas to Kathy and Tony for their work. This type of added support should be a conversation and not a mandate, contrary to Kathy and Tony's work and our staffs. 5, trust. If we truly believe, as you have said, that teachers write our curriculum, then how will this be perceived by our staff? Do Kathy and Tony lead our curriculum work? Regardless of the intentions, one likely outcome will be additional feelings that the board does not trust us to do the job the right way. You have indicated multiple times that Hillsdale resources or the full curriculum are desired. This is likely to be seen by some as a move to make that a reality, regardless of what the staff thinks is best. I will continue to encourage that this be a conversation about the need of a consultant and that our curriculum staff make the decision about what is needed. Signed, David. So I want to read it in its full because I want to say this is kind of it lays out. Now I want to be clear about something, right? Because in our kind of on-off pro-con either-or discourse that everyone is pretty much used to, this could be read as like, David Bolton, like champion of the people, right? But let's be clear. What Bolton is primarily talking about, just like Joan Cullen has talked about in the past, is one of process, right? It's the fact that it's clear Jordan Blomgren and Megan Bannis Clemens have already been kind of welcomed in and are kind of having impact and kind of making suggestions, being part of these curriculum meetings, already tells us that, that big changes have already been undergone, right? We know that. We also know that Bolton has not actually spoken out, right, very much against kind of Vermillion or this. And even in here, right, the question is not whether or not we agree with Christian nationalism being taught in our schools. It's not about that. It's not about a resistance to Vermilion per se. It's just a technical question about this, whether or not this is needed or not. Right? That it might be just kind of like you're paying somebody to do work that's already been done. Right? More of a practical, technical issue rather than one about the content of what they're being proposed, what they're proposing. And again, we could. There's 1,000 different reasons that we can imagine about what's going on there, but we've got to make sure that we're not just turning Bolton into a hero here when he has been, directly involved with the changes of this curriculum and has not really spoken out publicly against it, right? And what I keep on hearing from teachers and people who've talked to teachers now is that they're feeling continuously under threat. Right, there were something over 30 teachers just retired from the district, and by retired I don't mean just that they're old and they left. A lot of them have taken other jobs. They've left the district, I should say. I found out that I think it was somebody was telling me yesterday that was it 6 or 9? I'll say at least 6. I'll go err on the conservative end of the science teachers from the high school are leaving, for example. I also found out, right, or I was told, right, that the board members are also now sitting in on interviews with potential teachers. Right, so that's the degree of control, right? This was not what used to happen. Right? This is the degree of control they're trying to do. So not only are they changing the curriculum, right, they are trying to kind of nip in the bud any kind of teachers that might pose a challenge to their Christian nationalist agenda. So that was Bolton's letter. And then in this same set of documents from Jenny Stevens, we get Megan Bannis Clemens writes in response to his email. She writes, David, since you do not believe that there is a benefit to curriculum consultants, I expect to see a motion on the agenda tomorrow to terminate any open contracts with the other consultants we are paying a ridiculous rate in an apparently open blank check. They are also the ones who brought us the controversial curriculum that led to public controversy and scrutiny. Right? What she's talking about here is a process where they're having consultants that were there to work on kind of, say, diversity issues, kind of change the curriculum to update that, kind of best practices and so on, right? And, by the way, those consultants went through the normal process, right, of hiring and concealing, working with the curriculum directors, right? And they did have spelled out costs and contracts, right? And had clearly documented experience and credentials, but we'll put that aside for now. So now, Megan writes, Jordan was bringing in help and support. Jordan, thanks for your work on this. David, I'll remind you that you continue to add contracts to the agenda at the last minute, and in some cases without any board approval. This email is completely inappropriate and in bad faith. It actually makes me wonder what you're worried about. It gives me the impression that you have something to hide. It's interesting that all of a sudden this curriculum is just about done when it's not what has been shared with us in any way. This is just lies. And notice that she starts resorting to conspiracy theories. Like you've got something to hide. This guy has basically been in lockstep with helping this board, right, manage itself. And now because he raises questions about the process and tries to raise, I think, pretty legitimate consequences of doing it in the way that they did, right? In other words, this is how it's going to be perceived. He doesn't say this is what is going on. He said this is how it's going to be perceived by people, right? That's a communications question. That is a PR issue. It is not about the content of that curriculum, right? And instead, I said, oh my God, Bolton is like, he's actually a double agent. And now he's like, whatever. This is the board that we're talking about. And it was not long. So this was from April 25th. So this, you recall, I think we talked about this last week where Dr. Bolton he's taken a temporary leave of absence, which he said for health concerns. And we don't know anything beyond that. But then shortly after that, there's been, I'll say they're rumors, because even though people have said that they've heard this from reputable sources, I can't verify that, right? But there's been rumors that the board is moving to either fire Bolton or force him out. Right. This was brought up a couple times at this past week's meeting, where I said, well, now that you've gotten rid of him, now again, we shall see if that pans out to be true. I don't know if it is or not. But it tells you that, these pressures are there. So at the school board meeting too, as well, is there was, please go check out. We've got, a special playlist on our YouTube page now that's just called PA School Board Wars. And I've been busting them out. I've been kind of sharing kind of clips from the school board meetings where you can hear some of these parents' comments, and they're just pretty kind of phenomenal. It's the kind of organizing that we kind of need to continue to see. So kudos there. So at that same meeting, go back over here. I'll read you a bit from Jenny Stevens, what she said about that meeting the day after, right? So this is the 13th. So that the one I just read you was, these documents that dropped from the Right to Know Act. Then the meeting takes place. What was interesting too, Megan Bannis Clemens was not there at the beginning, but then she kind of like appeared out of like backstage. She walked on backstage and snuck into a place. It was like weird because you watch the meeting, as I did. Unless you were watching carefully, you didn't see her sneak in, and then suddenly she starts talking. Like, where did she come from? Right? The Red Wizard of Thay, Megan of Thay, is something else, I'll tell you. But anyways, so here's Jenny Stevens' response, or kind of write up of the report on the meeting. So public comment at Monday's Penridge School Board Committee was robust and unimpeded, unlike the meeting in May where comments were stifled and Pennsylvania's Sunshine Act was repeatedly trampled. Parents, recent graduates, and local residents exercised their opportunity to speak out about circumstances surrounding the board's conduct at recent meetings, the Vermillion-Hillsdale contract, and the weeding of books from several schools in the district. Quote, I know and I suspect many other people in the audience, have really had enough of board infighting, disrespectful behavior to staff and the public. Just overall unprofessional behavior, said Jane Kramer during public comment. Tonight's gone well, so thank you for that. But the last two meetings, those 45-minute delays, just so disrespectful. So I invite the board president and vice president to take the rest of my 3 minutes to apologize to the community. Now, of course, Dave Rice and Megan Bannis Clemens, the president and vice president, did not apologize, right? Surprise, surprise. Later on in the meeting, and this is one of the clips I posted up on our YouTube page. Again, it's under PA School Board Wars. Was Megan Bannis Clemens basically providing a quote-unquote explanation. Like, she went on for over 5 minutes talking about everything that happened. And really it was just about her experience, right? This was like her experience about what she was trying to do and why she was trying to do it. And then these people were at this place and these people were in the parking lot and they couldn't get Wi-Fi and all this kind of stuff. And Joan Cullen, again, let's not kind of turn her into some kind of hero, because she has been the person who's enabled all this behavior ultimately, by basically bringing in this extremist politics, right, for the beginning. So, but she knows process, right? And she basically said that is not what happened, right? Megan, you're lying, right? And we should apologize because it took, it was a lot of people. It was inconvenient for a lot of people, and they had no idea what was going on, right? Megan Bannis Clemens basically, no, we were trying to make it so acceptable, and she does this all the time, right? Her language is that, like, we were just trying to make it work. We were just trying to put it together the last meeting. We were just trying to kind of do everything that we could to make sure that we had the meeting. And all Joan Cullen was saying was like, look, it is law, right? In the state of Pennsylvania, it is a law that if you cancel a meeting, right, you cannot schedule another meeting for another 24 hours. In other words, there needs to be, part of the law is that you need to provide at least a 24-hour notice of changes in the meeting, which, by the way, is what they did for a very brief moment, right? You said, look, we're not going to come here because of the smoke, right? Because all the wildfire stuff that was kind of flooding the area, we're going to postpone the meeting until the following day. Right. And they had sent that out, I believe. Yes, they had sent that out with enough of the 24-hour notice. So that would have been inconvenient for everyone. That would have been, but at least it would have met the letter of the law. Right. Then, in the most bizarre turn of like less than an hour or an hour, maybe just over an hour before the meeting actually was going to take place on Wednesday. She's like, no, we're going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead with the meeting on Zoom. And what Joan Cullen was saying, right, and some other members of the board too, is like, that you can't do that. That's breaking the law, right? It's not whether or not like the meeting is a good thing, right? It's like that you just can't do that. And what Megan Bannis Clemens said, that Joan was just trying to grandstand, and she was just trying to basically give her stand in the way and not help out. And she's like, and Joan Cullen said, look, I was helping out to try to keep you from breaking the law, but you just wouldn't hear it. And instead you're going to attack me. So that stuff was, that kind of thing was going on. It was just pretty remarkable. And I just don't, you know, I just don't believe I live in this district is really what it comes down to, but whatever. More was said about the Vermilion contract. There is a petition that is out there right now that over, what is it? How many people have signed it? It was like 1,200 parents. It's over 1,000. I believe it's over 1,200 people have signed this petition, right? A petition against this Vermilion contract. So it says Laura Foster, parent of the children in the district, talked about the Vermilion contract. Quote, the vast majority of our community oppose the Vermilion contract being contracted with in Penridge. Our community has said time and time again that we do not want our children to be guinea pigs in the Vermilion experiment. 1,100, here we go. Foster then went on to read some of the comments and petitions signed by more than 1,100 area residents. This contract has not been properly vetted. It appears to be without service parameters or cost limits. Another comment was the consultant has no track record. Another comment, this is not how my tax dollars should be spent. Another one being, I'm signing this because our school board is misusing its power. I'm misusing my tax dollars. I do not agree with my money being spent on this, right? And then last one that she mentions, quote, I believe the school board needs to stay out of the classroom and leave teaching to teachers. Your job is to find a way to cut costs, which this is something I disagree with, to not inflict your political agenda onto teachers, students, parents, and our taxpayers. Just so, this is the other thing that keeps on coming up. You know, people keep saying, you said you're going to be fiscally responsible. You said you were going to be fiscally responsible. But this kind of comment, right, this is something that always concerns me too as well. It said, like, your job is to find ways to cut costs. And I would just fundamentally disagree with that. That is not their job. Their job is not look way to find cut costs. Their job is to help facilitate the most effective and best education that can be delivered given existing resources. All right. That is not cutting costs, right? That's a very different kind of thing. If your only job is cutting costs, then education will ultimately suffer. You're going to cut teachers. Because look, what's the number one cost in any education? Any education. We're talking about K through 12. We're talking about higher education. It's labor. It's people, right? Because teachers need to teach, right? It is a interpersonal kind of profession, right? So what are you going to cut? You're going to cut books? Okay, no, you want to basically, you don't, we start from, you're there to cut costs. I know this is, I'm going off in a different direction, but this is, if you're there, if you think the job of the school board is to find ways to cut costs, you're basically hamstringing your own schools. And you're basically telling your kids, right, that we're going to put you on the chopping block, right? Because what this ultimately leads to, and this is like the neoliberal process, right, where you're just basically anything that is public, you're going to try to turn into some private thing, or you're going to ask people to do more. Why do you think teachers are burned out, right? And in Penridge, when you have the schools pay like a third lower than all the other surrounding school districts, right? Shouldn't be surprising that teachers are leaving the district to go elsewhere, especially in this context. So no, their job is not to cut costs. Their job is to help facilitate the most effective, right, education given the existing resources, right? And when necessary, raising additional resources, right, to meet the demands of the school district. So for example, right now, there's building booms happening in the Penridge School District. Right? The amount of people that are moving to the area, right? The amount of new houses that are being constructed, the amount of renovations of old buildings turning into apartments and condos and things like this, that's expanding, right, in Percy and the surrounding areas. that is eventually going to mean there are going to be more people living here, and therefore more children living here, and then our schools are going to require more space. And the existing budget may not account for that. And if all I'm focused on is cutting costs, I may not be planning for what you need to do. There was a great discussion, actually, and I'll give this to Megan Bannis Clemens, right? I mean, she brought this issue up again. Well, why don't we focus on, putting AC in all of our schools, air conditioning in all of our schools? And Joan Cullen, in a remarkable moment of agreement with Megan Bannis Clemens, said, yes, I agree. This is probably a good idea, but we need to plan and budget for that. And then they were going back for, well, how do you prioritize this stuff, right? And again, this is where, you pit one group against another. And Joan Cullen basically said, look, we've talked about this for years. South Middle School has been consistently has received fewer resources than some of the other schools. It is an older building and it needs renovation, but it keeps on getting bumped down the road, right? In favor of this school, that school. That doesn't mean that these other schools don't need it, like elementary schools don't need it, but it just means like, hey, we gotta talk about the whole picture, not just you pick your favorites, right? And so that's a reasonable, good discussion. Well, how do we actually make this happen? And given the fact that things are only going to get warmer, right, with climate, that we're going to see more kind of extreme weather events, that's a great infrastructure question. So the question is, where does that money come from? And if the only tool you have at your disposal is cutting costs, right? That you mean that you're going to have to reduce teachers, right? You're going to have to reduce something, or you have to pack more kids in classrooms or something like this. I mean, I don't know. So let's just be clear about that. And I'm sorry for the kind of, the cul-de-sac there, kind of taking you on that diversion, but I think that's an important question. So anyways, this is basically how kind of what goes on. And I think that, this last part that I'll read from what happened here is this Robin Levy of Bedminster, right? She compared Vermilion's contract with a timeshare, and then she goes on to make a really important point. So I just want to read you her whole comment here. So, quote, I don't know if any of you guys have a timeshare. It's the only thing I could think of that you pay every month but have no idea how much it costs. You have no idea when you're going to get hit with extra costs, and there's no end unless you die, and then you're done, she said. Most of you, not all of you, but most of you ran on fiscal responsibility, and this is the least fiscally responsible thing I could think of, right? So this is kind of a perfect example. Then she goes on to say, and I think this is important, I read the 1776 curriculum. This is the one from Hillsdale College. I read the 1776 curriculum, and I swear to you, if you replace the word German every time that man wrote American child, it would look like something it would look like it came from something written in 1933, and it scared the crap out of me, she added. Right? I'm so glad that she made that comment, right? There was also a phenomenal comment that was made by another parent, where she basically talked about kind of the mental health issues, right? And then why it's so kind of critical not to be banning a bunch of books that are going to be really important for kids, especially ones who are feeling kind of marginalized or who are marginalized. That was just a phenomenal moment here. Heather Young, I think, is one who made that comment. So anyways, the struggle continues. I mean, what can I say? This is kind of where we are and where we're going. So anyways, yeah, that's what I want to say. I'm sorry I'm so out of it here today, guys. Everybody, what else I wanted to say? Oh, here, I'll mention this, and we'll kind of close off with this because this is a little bit fun. So there's some new research that's been coming out that's basically looking at, it's modeling out kind of what's going to happen with AI. And there's all sorts of new reasons to be concerned about AI. I'll give you two examples of reasons to be concerned. One, Google is telling its own employees to not mess around with the Google Bard, right? That's its own chatbot, right? That tells you like a bunch there. And then secondly, I was Alana Pierce. I don't know if anybody knows her. She's a gamer, but she's a kind of YouTuber and gamer and things like this. And she kind of came to notoriety years ago because she was basically pushing for more women in the gaming industry, right? Not just in kind of like, commentary, but actually game design and all this other stuff. And there was a whole bunch of internet attacks against her, right? like race or sexist stuff, like horrific stuff. And she got known, at the time, because basically what she did is that she kind of got in touch with these, and most of the time were like young boys, right? Teenage boys making horrific comments on her. And she basically got in touch with their parents and their moms in particular, said, hey, just wanted to let you know that this is what your son is sending me every day, right? And that there was magazine covers and so on. Anyways, but she's a game designer. She's like this stuff. And she just did this, just came up on my feed, and I was like, wow, this is nuts. So there's this new thing, I guess it's by NVIDIA. It's a AI plugin for streaming. And in particular, so if you're looking at me, if you're watching me on YouTube right now, it's like, my eyes are going to go all over the place. But basically, it uses AI to make it appear as if you are always looking into the camera, right? You're always making eye contact with your audience, right? So she just did this, just a demo of it, and she's like, this is really freaking me out, because she's like looking down, looking to the side, kind of looking, closing her eyes. And despite all of that, the AI was correcting for her and making it appear that her eyes are looking only at the camera. Really crazy. So there's all that kind of stuff going on. But on a much more kind of macro level, there is, let's see where this comes from. So this is a group of researchers from the UK and Canada have looked into this problem of, what do they call it? It's called, oh God, I know it's going to kill me. But basically, it's a feedback loop, right? That's happening with AI. So I'll just read a little bit of this for you. This is just, whatever, the best laid plans is, put this in there. So the age of generative AI is here. Only 6 months after OpenAI's ChatGPT burst onto the scene, as many as half the employees at some leading global companies are already using this type of technology in their workflows, and many other companies are rushing to offer new products with generative AI built in, just like the NVIDIA example. But as those following the burgeoning industry and its underlying research know, the data used to train the large language models, the LLMs, and other transformer models are underpinning products such as ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, and Midjourney comes initially from human sources. In other words, it's pulling from books and articles and photographs and so on that were created without the help of the artificial intelligence. Now, as more people use AI to produce and publish content, an obvious question arises. What happens as AI-generated content proliferates around the internet and AI models begin to train on it instead of on primarily human-generated content? Right? A group of researchers from the UK and Canada have looked into this very problem and recently published a paper on their work in the open access journal ARXIV or ARXIV, I don't know. What they found was worrisome for current generative AI technology and its future. Quote, we find that the use of model-generated content in training causes irreversible defects in the resulting models. Specifically, looking at the probability distributions for text-to-text and image-to-image AI generative models, the researchers concluded that, quote, learning from data produced by other models causes model collapse. That's the word I was looking for. A degenerative process whereby over time, models forget the true underlying data distribution. This process is inevitable, even for cases with almost ideal conditions for long-term learning. Over time, mistakes in generated data compound and ultimately force models to learn from generated data to misperceive reality even further, unquote, wrote one of the paper's leading authors, Ilya Sumalov, in an email to VentureBeat. Quote, we were surprised to observe how quickly model collapse happens. Models can rapidly forget most of the original data from which they initially learned. In other words, as an AI training model is exposed to more AI-generated data, it performs worse over time, producing more errors in the responses and content it generates, and producing a far less non-erroneous variety in its responses. It's just crazy. So, will AI eat itself, I guess, is the big question. Big question. Oh God, it is a Friday for sure. Well, listen, everybody, I'm gonna cut it here. And I'm sorry, one, for the late start. Number two, sorry for kind of being a little bit of a meandering stream this morning. But look forward. So listen, I want to give you a program note from Monday too as well. So there is not going to be a live show on Monday. Instead, do tune in. I'm going to put it out at the 7 to 7 o'clock end, just like normal. We have Mark Engler on the show. So I did a pre-record with Mark on Tuesday. and we're talking about his article that's basically looking at the ways that social movements can prevent politicians from selling out. It's a great conversation. It's a pretty of a whirlwind one. He literally kind of talks through the entire piece that he puts out. And as I learned in the interview, that this is part of Mark's next book, which I was thrilled to hear. But you've heard me talk about his book before on the show called "This Is an Uprising: How Nonviolent Revolt is Shaping the 21st Century." Mark is a Philly-based writer, and he is one of the he's on the editorial board of Dissent magazine. Writes about social movements and nonviolent conflict. He's absolutely fantastic. Had a great conversation with him, so look for that on Monday. But just so you know, it'll be published out there, but it is not going to be a live show. So that may so if you're not getting answers back from me, if you jump into the chat and so on like this, that's because it's just kind of released special for that time. Okay, just wanted to let you know. All right, everybody. Have a great weekend. Hope you enjoy some of this rain. I know I am. I just got a little bit of a warning that there's going to be some thunder coming through, so I guess it's a good time for me to get off the computer. Have a great weekend. Keep up the fight, and we will see you soon. Whew. I'm going to go take a nap, I think. All right, everybody. Take it easy. Talk to you soon. See ya!
There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.